Is Margaret here? Paul? Is Margaret here? No, Margaret Simon. Library. Is Margaret Simon here? She will be. Okay, everybody. Are we? Do I have to talk right into it? I have to. All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, hi, everybody.
Why don't you sit down?
Okay. I was avoiding it. Okay. Ah, good. Let's get a little closer, okay? Can we do that?
So where is it?
Ooh, there's a drawer. You want to help Mike make me closer?
Okay.
Okay. Are we okay?
We need to bring the
Am
mic.
I okay? Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. Well, last week, people who met people during the week said that they met people who said it was fun and that it could have gone on much longer. Well, this is good. So the subjects this week, but the history of 3 very significant multifamily dwellings in Cleveland. And they're significant for different reasons. The first, I'm going to go chronologically. I want to thank Paul Stroud, who's taking pictures of his condominium. He's the general manager. Would you wave? Does everyone know you? He's been absolutely terrific. I have to tell you that someone else has been terrific too, and that's Mike Yeager. He's walking around about the mics. This room comes with no equipment, so we have had to bring in whatever we have. And this week it is borrowed from CSU, where I did some interviewing for the Department of Digital Humanities. I worked with them quite a bit. And so they've let us borrow their equipment. And so that's good. The third thing is that I'm going to make you work today. I would very, very much appreciate it if you would like and think that it's beneficial. We planned what's on the wall just down a little bit, and I want everybody to go examine it for 10 minutes so that when we talk, first of all, your website is beautiful. The website for Moreland Courts is beautiful. Why should I try to recreate that? Secondly, Jim Gibans came over. He was head of landmarks at one point in Cleveland, and he came over and worked with Paul to go through the drawings, hundreds and hundreds of drawings. And I asked him a question, and Paul may differ with me, but he said there are about 50 really, 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 really good ones. And some of these over here are so lovely as drawings of the building as it was being constructed by the architect. These are drawings by the architect. And so the combination of, when you get finished, standing across the street and looking at this complex of a dozen or more buildings, and looking at what is really here, the details, and looking at the stunning stunning restoration that has been done of this building. It really, really gives great homage to not only Paul, but a board. In terms of condominiums, you have to have a board. And the board determines much of what happens and also how much it's going to cost. But restoration is really worth it. And this building is one exemplar nationally now. It's on the register, and the board and Paul made it happen. And you're going to see something about the building across the street, but it's different, and it has a different melody to it. And so it's on the roster here today because of that. It has a different story.
I'm going to interrupt right for just a minute, because I'm really looking at Paul Stroud, and I think how lucky this condominium is to have the management and the love for his job that gentleman has. And he has been so helpful and so enthusiastic, and has, suggested things that I may not have thought about. And thank you, Paul, for all you've done.
Okay, so I'm asking you to use your eyes now and go to the gallery further to my left and look at the drawings. There aren't a lot. They're beautiful, though. And I think if you just exit afterwards, it's going to mean something different. So do that now, so when we talk, you will have done that. And anyone that doesn't want to, I'm not pressing. I just think it's a good idea.
The sound system is not good enough. We need to speak louder. It's hard to hear.
You can't hear?
Not well. Last week it was not very good either. This week is not.
Get near me.
Maybe we could move that forward.
Well, Michael will have to.
Michael.
Okay.
That's better?
You're gonna need to.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and me too.
Bring you close. Bring you close. That works. Yes, as usual,
Is that,
When
was
tends to pull back.
I too soft?
The closer you get to the mic, the better.
I'll do that. Oh, hi. Hello. Hello. Hi.
I'm Kathy Schulman, Chuck's sister.
Oh,
I
my.
wanted to say hi, and I was talking to my mom, Carol. She said to send you.
Oh, yeah. Can I make you raise your hand because Chuck is on the film?
He is?
Well, yeah, what he says is on the film. I understand.
Great. I mean, I know I didn't look closer, but I saw your book, several years ago.
Yeah, no, this one's on Shaker Tower.
Yeah,
wonderful. Jim, Bill's going to sit there first.
I can't hear you.
Bill is going to sit here first before you. How are you? Good. That wouldn't be something they'd ever give me. I know from the film that I made across the street who lived there. I've got all the records. Well, you can ask in the office. I wouldn't. What was it look like? Everybody ready, almost? Uh-huh. Jim just... I think we can start if most people are ready. Now, anybody that can't hear should get up right in front. We're going to try very, very hard to make it possible for everybody to hear. And if you can't, please tell us that we have a problem with one of the films and it's only because of mechanism, mechanics. All right. The other thing is that there are handouts. You'll come up in a minute, okay? Is that okay? We'll get you out of here. Somebody came in with their filled out questionnaire. So do it if you would like to. It's part of this project called The Soul of Cleveland. And in order to be sure everybody knows that that's a project that's ongoing, started with discussions around the table with people from different disciplines as a celebration of our 60 years of marriage, and that was last year. And we've had events at the Happy Dog, which took some pieces of it. It really is about those things that have made a difference in your life. They are not about what you have done necessarily. What has made a difference in your life, what has changed your perspective, that's the soul of Cleveland. So, Moreland Courts fits in. Why Moreland Courts? Because it's unique, beautiful, and I had to fight to have it here because it's residential, because it's private, because nobody's done it before, but that's the name of my game. And so it's just that we are going to address it in two different ways. First of all, those drawings that you just saw are not made that way today. Everything is mechanical. Jim will tell you that CAD has taken over. And that people do not draw architecturally in that way anymore. So you are seeing something that is unique, it is yours, and you should be very, very proud of it. They're beautiful, aren't they? Yeah, so please appreciate that. We have also Margaret Simon coming from the library today with the book which is called 75 Years of Shaker Life, and we all wrote for it. I'm sure you did. There were pieces of it in 1989, and it was published, and it's just mine's coming apart because it's so fragile. But it's $5. She's selling them. She was coming today, yeah, and I think she will. And so she's here. Can she wave? Margaret's a very important part of Shaker's library system, and she's been there. We've all been around a long time. Margaret's been there a long time. So that's available for you. And then there are the handouts. So we've tried to keep on target here. All right, the building, the one thing that we are not addressing today is that the why and when the city of Cleveland vote, and we vote, put it this way, we vote for the mayor of Cleveland. We are in the city of Cleveland. The library system, education, and recreation, we also vote for them. So we have double taxes here. It's a unique arrangement that was made early on. And it was the Van Swearingens that did it. And in the beginning, the Vans, in their development of Shaker, determined that there would be no apartment buildings there. But this area was saved for high-rise building. And it was to allow, people to live this way. And is Margaret there? She going to say hi? All right, well, it's okay. And so...
She says she's in her place.
Okay. So when the company called the Josiah Kirby Cleveland Discount Company bought the land from the Vans in 1922, they developed the vision with Alfred Harris. That's whose drawings you've seen over there. And they only completed the first 6 buildings. There are a dozen. And they are, in his vision, they were to be in English architecture of all sorts, because that's what he saw as an airplane pilot in World War I. And that's where we are. And then the company fails. The Cleveland Discount Company fails. And the Vans buy it back. And buy the land and the property. And from the Point Building to the West Towers was already completed, and now the other buildings become completed by another architect. So the simplicity of this part, the western part of the block, is from the second architect, Philip Small. So By 1929, everything is complete, and we have a streamlined Georgian look to this part of down to Shaker Square. It was important to connect to Shaker Square. You know, this building does connect to the restaurant. It always did connect to Stouffer's and the restaurants that were to the west.
Let me add very quickly something about that, about the difference of the different years. One of the things that has happened is as the ownership of the land changed and the initial planning image, which was really the Van Swearingen wanted the whole development to be Shaker Square. And there are master plans which we were unable to conveniently bring out here, shows we have about 3 different plans of how Van Aken Boulevard, Shaker Boulevard, Shaker Square in its concept, and the interlocking of the various housing and commercial buildings changed as the ownership changed. And it, not unusual. Take a look at Van Aken Center now, you know. But it is, you know, part of the real estate realities of development.
Okay, so we have by 1930, and we are Lowenthal, long related to Shaker Square and Shad, and Jim and I were on the board and all that. We are collecting hundreds of names of people that have literally been involved at Shaker Square, and we will be doing that. So the point is that today we're going to focus on these buildings. I'm skipping to 1978 because that's when the building became condominium. That was the time when there were lots of changes to condominium life and laws around that. It was the time when all of these buildings started to go condominium, and where at that time and beyond, like the 80s, 90s, and so forth, the laws have become more and more elaborate of how much you need to have in reserve for restoration and capital and all of that. We've all gone through that. We've been our presidents and we've been on our boards, and we've chatted with your boards here because that's what you were going through when you were restoring the building. So in 1983, though, this building became a national monument, National Register of Historic Places, and that's a very important thing. Jim will tell you what that means. What does it mean? One paragraph, one sentence.
It means that the building shape, building content as a piece of construction, a piece of art, cannot be changed without the consent of the government and the local governments and the federal government, because it is a federal designation. And it also has some as far as redevelopment or whatnot, there are tax implications and tax credits that can be gotten for it. But the main thing is, to me, it's the fact that we are telling people this is important, that what we have developed and what we must protect are the same thing because they have both historical and aesthetic value.
That's the point. So it's a very important place in terms of Cleveland and the community. And you realize it takes up a whole block. It's unique as a concept. If you feel comfortable with the history, fast history, I'm going to move to the anecdotal area, which I'm going to start by telling you a story. First of all, Mildred Delia was your telephone operator for 35 years or so. She had her hair done across the street. I found out yesterday that she went to the beauty parlor across the street, and so did your mom.
Helen Milner's.
And the beauty parlor still exists, the beauty salon across the street. So,
No, not the same one, no,
what?
Not the same.
not the same one.
What's not the same?
The beauty parlor.
The beauty salon has been owned by the same person since she was 19. She's been there.
Helen Milner's was.
Oh, no,
That's
not
the-
Helen Milner. Shaker Tower.
Oh,
Oh,
I know.
it's Shaker Tower, oh.
Yeah, Shaker Tower still has its beauty salon. Now, the amenities here are so numerous that I want you to go to the website. They are integral to the way the building was built and preserved. The details are beautiful, from the floors to the sconces to the height of the apartments and so forth and so on. So I just want you to know I haven't forgotten that. But the website does a beautiful job by giving you a photograph, and there's also a that you can get on your website. Mildred was central to the switchboard. She worked the switchboard and the plug-in phone lines at a time before today's push-button console unit. Her job included heralding the beginning of heat each fall when the temperature fell below 40 degrees. Many residents moved to the south upon retirement, and the report was among the things that was the first query that they made regarding Mildred. Once she saved a life. That's another story. The central heating plant, until a few decades ago, was on 130th. That meant that whenever the steam was started off or closed off, she called each merchant, professional, or resident of Shaker Square to tell them to turn their valves properly. I guess she knew everybody. She remembers the students who were doormen and the maids' rooms that have come into today's family rooms and offices. You can tell how many times have changed by the telephone board. She liked the old one better. She could tell 10 people at one time. She told me she could have conversations that she loved to have with 10 of the residents at one time. Then she'd plug in another 10, and so on. They could all hear me and hear one another, a private coffee clutch, all of our own. She really thought that the job was to be a friend. So she was saving people's lives. Someone had not heard from for a long time, she'd check on them. She would just talk to people that needed to talk to somebody and couldn't sleep. So that's her story. That's my anecdote. And I want to introduce Bill by just saying that I looked on the website of Bill, wherever you are on the website. And believe me, if any of you are ever on websites, you're there somewhere. But the main thing that people would say was, well, he's my eye doctor.
I took care of Mildred too.
Yeah. So everybody is so fond of their memories of you as their physician and I know that you have been a very firm, wonderful community person in University Circle organizations. And so if you want to tell us anything about that before we start, it'd be great, but you may not.
Is it,
It's your
should I just
turn.
take over? Okay. Can I stand up?
Sure.
Well,
Jim,
I'm
okay.
used to lecturing to medical students and residents, and the only way I can really tell if they're awake is I keep moving. The ones who say my trips are usually so, you can hear me? So, I'll just sort of follow up on your comment. I served on the board of Case Western Reserve University for about 21 years, and the board of Hawkins School, which were the two major things I've been involved in over the years, also for 21 years, but now I'm emeritus on all that, so it's nice, but I'm still practicing. I wanted to talk a little bit about, let's talk about the soul of the city. Really, cities and buildings and homes and places don't have souls, do they? It's really the people that live there, and the people who occupy the space if they work there. So I'm going to tell you perhaps a little more than you want to know about my own family and our relationship to Moreland Courts. I'd like to start with my grandfather, who was the first member of our family actually to come to Cleveland. This is in 1894. He was at the University of Pennsylvania. He finished Wesleyan University in 1888 and then went to University of Pennsylvania Medical School, class of 1892. And then he did a residency with the Schweinens, who at the time was probably the premier ophthalmologist in the country, and finishing in 1894. And at that time, invited my grandfather to come and really start an ophthalmology program here in Cleveland, because most of the folks were double ENT. Those of you know what that is? That's eye, ear, nose, and throat. It was the early years of when it split off. But in any case, so this was my grandfather, and he moved to Cleveland, coming in 1894, and a year later, let's see, am I doing it right, Wayne? He invited his high school sweetheart, Lydia Clark, to get married, and she joined my grandfather in Cleveland in 1895. Prior to that, none of my family was here. Now, let's move forward a bit. Next forward. Did I do that? Okay, thank you. When they got married, I bet you all don't know where this is. Anybody? This is East Cleveland. It's a townhouse in East Cleveland where they moved to when they got married. And that's where my father was born in 1910. His mother was 45 years old, so was his father. He was born in this house, lived to be 94. So, but that was pretty amazing for 1910. They lived there till the early 20s, and I'm going to kind of walk you through this family history because I think it's important. They moved then to Cleveland Heights, and this is a home on Fairfax. They lived here from the early 20s, and let's hit another button here, I think. So then in about 1936, my dad finished college, and here's my father, and of course my grandmother and my grandfather. So at that point, my grandmother had her eyes on this unit. Let's pretend this is the West Tower, the west-facing top floor, and with a really nice view, and was watching the obituaries because she knew who lived there. At that time, it was a bank president. I'm not sure I even know the name, but I think the moment the obituary came out, she came over to Moreland Courts, put her name down, and got the unit. So it's kind of fun. So the three of them moved in to Moreland Courts, 8A West Tower, in 1937, where they lived a few years, and then this was the view in 37. This is where the CVS parking lot is now. You can see this is looking sort of northwest, I guess you'd say. And next, please. And here's my grandfather and my dad, probably in about maybe the late 30s, early 40s. Next, please. Then my dad met my mom. This was 1942. Okay, they met late December, early January. The war had just started. 3 months later, they got married, and they immediately moved in temporarily with my grandfather. Same unit, same floor. My sister was born, and then I was born. So we ended up living there longer than just a few years. So this is my sister Lydia, who you notice has the same name as her grandmother, and Bill, that's me, with William. I'm actually named after my grandfather. And of course my mother Polly, who many of you knew. So this was probably about 1950 something, 50 maybe. And they wanted me to go to Wesleyan, but that's another story. Next slide, please. Oh, I better let you do it, because when I do it, it's good. Now, so my grandfather, again, lived with my parents and us, and they ended up they liked it so much here, my parents said, well, let's not get a house, let's just stay here. So they did. And we need again, here's my grandfather. He actually worked until his 90th birthday, and this is the occasion of his 90th birthday when he retired, and he was in the Guardian building downtown, which became the National City Bank building, as many of you, no, none of you would know that, or remember that. That was too long ago. But, and then he retired and lived 8 more years. Next, please. And so here I am. This is my grandfather, after whom I'm named, and this is me. And this is the back garden here behind Roland Courts. Probably, again, 1950. Next, please. Summer of 50. So along comes, I grew up. I'm going to fast forward now. So now we're about 1974, finishing medical school. We met and we married and in 1975, and we actually ended up living in 12F2. So I have sort of 2 places where I was. My parents at the time still in the West Tower. Next slide, please. We lived there and owned that for 4 years. Now, this is in 2000, my mother died. In 2004, my father died. And at that point, we were in a house in Shaker, and my wife and I said, well, the kids are gone, the dogs are dead. What do you think we should do? My dad would either have to, we'd either sell it or I would take it over. And we decided to make the move. And so 10 years ago, we moved into the same unit that they had moved into in 1937. Next slide, please. And here it is. I'm not sure the date on this, but you can see the southwest view. Next slide. And here it is in the 40s. The only difference here really is the cars. You notice those big old cars. But this at the time was Franklin Simon, as many of you remember. And of course, that was the Colony Drugstore, and this was Clark's Restaurant. Next slide, please. This is more about Shaker Square. Now this is, I call Moon over Cleveland, and this is the reason my grandmother and father and my father and everybody loved our unit, because this is the view we have out of our library. And I actually took this picture in the last full moon, I think last month. And it really is incredible. And this is Cleveland. It's a wonderful city. Next slide, please. Now, next generation comes along. So I have a son who's now 34 and just got married, and my daughter is 36. This is an old picture. This is up on the roof. Unfortunately, he moved back to Philadelphia, but guess where he is? He's working at the University of Pennsylvania, where my grandfather came from. So it's kind of gone full circle. And they're having a baby in 3 weeks. I'm hoping they'll move back to Cleveland, and maybe we can get a 4th generation in here. I don't know. Depends. I have a feeling that. My daughter is marrying a young man who owns Rittman Orchards, and many of you know the long lines for the apples and peaches here in the summertime. So she won't be living it, for sure. So I'm hoping my son might decide to move back to Cleveland. Next slide, please. Now, I just have a few final views from the deck which we built on top of our unit. Next slide. And these are not photoshopped. This is the incredible nature of Cleveland and the views. Next slide, please. I mean, it's just, I get up in the morning and I don't need to call the weather or look on my phone. It's just, well, and my wife says, why don't you just look out the window? You don't have to. But I used to use my phone. Next slide. And you can watch the storms coming in from the west. So that's a brief synopsis or summary of kind of my family and how we tie in with this wonderful building. It's really my home, as you can see. I've spent all but, well, my family's been here forever. I was here often, but the 25 years we spent in Shaker Heights, and years, I was away for college, but, and I just have obviously fond memories of all playing hide and seek and exploring all the places around here. So, any questions? Thank you for listening. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Anybody else using it?
Thank you so much. Well, Moreland Courts is certainly special. We have found it in the ways that we've described it, and I'm sure everybody that lives here has anecdotes. This is going to progress, though, to the next building. In 1932, Philip Johnson wanted to bring his international exhibit on architecture to Cleveland and to other locations. And he did. The one in Cleveland had to, well, in each city, he asked that there be a building from the city in the exhibit wherever it took place. And these exhibits took place in stores, they took place in museums, and so forth. Here in Cleveland, Philip's father, mother was an art aficionado and taught art in the living room when he was a kid. Philip grew up in Cleveland Heights. Most people know that. In a house that's no longer there, except that the carriage house is there at the end of Herrick Mews in Cleveland Heights. So the building that he included in Cleveland was to be one that he thought was by Joseph Weinberg, architect. And
Oh, the post.
And okay, so Joe Weinberg, architect, was a friend of Milliken, William Milliken. And I took his daughter to find out what picture we could find of what was in the museum, because we couldn't find it. We could not find what was being discussed as a modern dwelling by Philip Johnson at that time. So it emerged that we found it by digging. Joe Weinberg started the firm of Conrad and Weinberg Tier later in the years there, and Jim will continue this story, but I asked Jim Herman of the present firm to bring the archives to me. One folder, he said, if it's not in here, it's nowhere. So we looked, and there was an article by Wally Tier in 1932. And at the bottom of the page was a building. And it was a boring article, I'm telling you. It was for the building magazine. It had nothing to do with aesthetics really, but to emphasize public housing that was on its threshold. And I turned over the page, and there was an asterisk. And it said, "This design is now at the Museum of Art." There we are. That's what Joe Weinberg had at the Cleveland Museum of Art in 1932, representing what Philip Johnson wanted there. So it was a very little beginning. Let me tell you about Jim, though, Jim Gibans. The reason he's here is that he was instrumental in restoring Lakeview Terrace, which was the building that was to be built. And he'll show you some slides in a minute about the original site, building, and the meaning of that building in Cleveland. And so Jim is an architect. He graduated from Yale. He had a Fulbright. He was the head of the Landmarks Commission here and had the good fortune, really, to be restoring a building that the firm had originally built. People don't get that opportunity very often. So I want to present you to Jim, or Jim to you, and let him continue with his story.
Thank you. I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is the fact of the period we're talking about, when Philip Johnson, with one of the most important modern architectural historians, Henry Russell Hitchcock, sort of conjoined their interest into looking at modern contemporary architecture. It was the time when Europe was biting pretty hard into it. Mies van der Rohe was part of it. The international style, the beginning of the international style, Hitchcock, and it was
Johnson.
and Johnson had a we're trying to introduce that their exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York was bringing in the examples of this, and it affected we had these young architects like Joe Weinberg or Wally Tier and Bill Conrad, and remember these were young graduates of the architecture school with nowhere to go because there was no building going on. I mean, this was 1929, 1927 when the Depression hit and hit hard. But it was how to get that sort of, that's how you live. An architect lives by his passion, in a way, for architecture, for design, and whatnot, and to get them to realize that they weren't the only ones who wanted contemporary architecture. And so, but there was no business. There was no work, nobody thinking. So they had actually very little choice but leave Cleveland and try to find something else or whatever. And so for example, Wally Tier spent about a half a dozen years in Panama during the growth of the Panama Canal Zone, and contributed to the architecture of that. And that's the sort of thing they did. However, they were passionate about the condition of architecture, the condition of housing for the populace. Cleveland, in 1900, had developed tremendously. The number of people, for the most part, interestingly, most of the workmen and the working class were Irish Catholic, and they needed work. These were people who maybe had small jobs because of the Depression, or maybe the women worked out of the house, but there was no place for them to live decently. Ernie Bone has been called the father of fair housing, the father of housing, actually, in Cleveland. And his passion was to find a way to find decent housing for people. As I said, there was no money. Finally, around 1935, the Federal Housing Authority was established. In 1944, I think, I'm sorry, 1934, the Cleveland Metropolitan Housing Authority was established. And naturally, Ernie was the chairman. And they started looking at what their options were, and did finally get, by 35, the federal government, the Federal Housing Authority, was established, and there was the means, the financial means, to start doing housing. Cleveland was somewhat unique. It was I think one of the few places in the country where it was authorized, and it was authorized for 3 different places. Now this is pretty interesting. The first one was Lakeview Terrace. Lakeview Terrace, if you don't know, is up off of West 25th. West 20.
Do you want,
Yeah.
have you got your,
Oh,
I'll do it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's ahead of time. No. Okay. I'll wait. That's a preview. Okay. Wait a minute. I got to catch back.
Here, let me
All right.
help you.
No. Okay, we were one of the first. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt would come to Cleveland in 1937 to dedicate Lakeview Terrace.
You have a picture of that.
Yeah. Oops,
No,
wrong
the
way.
other way. There.
I'll be back to that. There she is, walking with her. So you see on the left side there, the woman with the dark fur stole, or whatever you want to call it, walking along one of the main roads. But in fact, this development was honored by Philip Johnson for inclusion in the Museum of Modern Arts.
That's how I got
exhibition
there.
on the international style. So these were architects who were passionate about this new design style. No colonial frills, and none of the what might call the beautiful development of detail that we find here, but instead it had a sleekness and well, anyway, it was slim. That's the right word. Well, anyway, it was the type of building we need. They needed. Let me get back. And this is typical of the style. This, instead of a plain style, however, it took advantage of the structure and of design of balconies and whatnot, and shade and shadow to give it some indication. It wasn't just a plain box with holes in it. We had that was the medium rise. These were a series of townhouses, and this was very typical of that European style. Look at the canopy with the turned down edge on the left side. There is a well-known and honored designed by J.J. P. Oud, a Dutch architect, which had those features on it and was published, and it had to make sense. But look the humanity that is in that entrance, and taking it and inviting people to sit there. And this is looking onto a common greens, because these were interesting buildings because they were set up from up a hill. Let's see, I think we have a site plan. Oh, by the way, this was the exhibit at the Cleveland Institute of Art.
The Cleveland Museum of Art.
Cleveland Museum of Art, I'm sorry, of that housing design that Joe Weinberg and Wally Tier put together, and it was shown in the museum.
There's your site.
There on the right side is the site. Let me get up here. Here's the, not outer hall, but the strip road ended up well over there and then came in here. But this is the river. This is a very steep land, and so difficult to do, but that's where you started stepping down. So every of these houses had a view of the river. Or some of these later would have a view of them. So it was all inclusive. Also included, which was very important, was community group. Most housing authorities or housing developments had no such thing. But that is how people work together. Okay, one of the things that is, let me go back to community building. Lakeview Terrace Community Center was midpoint. It was about here. It was a community center, recreation area, and was unique because for the first time again, the the Public Works Administration funded arts. Would allow sculpture, would allow art, would allow murals and whatnot to be part of the buildings, because the artists also needed support. And this was an ambition, or when it was renewed in 1984. We started a series of renovations. This, Lakeview Parish was about 650 units of housing, and for the most part, again, it was to house these working class people, and the units were rented, and the units were very clean and special, and again, I started to say what was special is art was included, and one of the first ones to get financial support was William McVeigh. Most of you know who William McVeigh was. Matter of fact, Steggy was just taken down. That was one of his masterpieces from in front of the Museum of Natural History, or whatever they call it these days. Anyway.
Can you hear him?
Pardon?
They can't hear you much, so if you want to come back here,
Okay, I'm sorry.
yeah, you want to come back here.
Grab that. Better? Is that better?
No.
I'm sorry. At any rate, one of the things he did this incised brick
progression of settlers. And at the end wall was his sculpture of Paul Bunyan. And this, it overlooks the river, and it's one of the great things, and this has been completely redone, remounted, and whatnot. Inside, this was originally a mural, and it was a very 1930-ish mural. And by the time we got there, and so this was done in the 30s. By the time we got there, it had been pretty well ruined, and the building itself was, as most of the buildings on the site by the time we got into it, were rotten. Nobody bothered, just like any masonry. You don't take care of the lintels, you don't take care of maintaining the waterproofing and whatnot, it goes to hell. So that was our fun, was to get the hell out of the architecture and build up. And this is, of course, one of my favorites, because here is, as pictured here, we don't wear clothes like that. but that was what gave this place real humanity. And as we remodeled it, renewed it, we added to it as well as repaired it. And I always like this photograph, because not only do you have these wonderful forms, but then you go back and you see the basic form of the projecting balconies and whatnot, which again gave these houses something special.
Thank you. I just want to say that this building is the only building in Cleveland that has had national recognition, and it's because Lewis Mumford wrote about it. Now, he was a critic, an architectural critic, who was well respected by everybody, and he visited, and Lakeview Terrace is in his book. That's how things are known. If it isn't published, I mean, that really is what architecture is about. If it isn't published, nobody knows about it outside of the city. And you may know that we wrote a book together on Cleveland Goes Modern, and the same thing is true, that the only building is right around the corner. The only house that ever won national recognition is Don Hasaka's house on Drexmoor. And it's because he was, the architect themselves are sometimes the ones that are our aggressors in publishing, getting published by Architectural Record or in the newspapers or in the promotions for the windows or for the however, the materials that are used. All of the architects in the book that we wrote that had any national recognition got it in those ways that I'm describing. But Lakeview Terrace was early recognized by Eleanor Roosevelt, for one, but the second thing was that Lewis Mumford, in the Annals of Architectural Criticism, wrote about it. And that's the way life is in the world of architecture. Do you have any questions, more questions about Lakeview Terrace? Go visit it. It's still on the hillside. It still has that wonderful look about it. And the article that Jim Cox, who wrote about this building and many machinations about the unions and getting everybody to cooperate to work on the building, is in an issue of Timeline magazine, which is the publication of the Ohio Historical Society. And the issue is, I think I can tell you, is anyway, it's April through June of 2014. The building got a preservation award a few years ago. So again, preservation plays a role. Now, the third building is Shaker Condominiums. Shaker Towers Condominiums across the street. Shaker Towers Condominiums will not be on the National Register, even though it's the last high-rise that was built with windows in the kitchens and in the kitchens and the bathrooms in Cleveland. It was developed by Joe Cerruti in 1948 to 50. Now, those were the years when laws made it impossible to make regulations about who could live anywhere into effect. And I think what we didn't say was Van Swearingen was Van Swearingen was Van Swearingen. In Shaker, there were laws about who could live on properties, what they had to do to make those properties the colors that the Vans wanted, what the style of the housing could be, how the fencing could be, and we have story after story after story about those regulations. And in 48 to 50, that's the time when those are changing. There are laws, then national laws, that are taking effect. And the Shaker Towers condominiums were built for the purpose of making Shaker Square diverse. We learned that, and the sizes of the rooms from the get-go were to emulate what was already here across the street. We know that. It's not a myth. It is fact. So I decided we had to do the history somehow. How? How are things preserved? By writing about it, by filming it, or whatever. One thing, Kathy, where are you? Kathy Shulman. Kathy Shulman's family has been the management family in that building since the beginning. That is unique. The Shulman Management Company, and we work with Chuck all the time. You may know Carol Kitzinger, that's his mom, and so Kathy came today. I don't know Kathy, but she came and introduced herself. So, Mike, we're going to try, Mike tells me that because of our problems here, mechanically, that the film, what can't we do? I can walk through it, but you can see what's on the film but not hear?
You may have a hard time hearing.
So we started to tell the story and interviewed about 20 people who said they would be interviewed. And some of the stories that are not in the film are the fact that there was a pathway all the way from Shaker Towers to Van Aken, underground. And until the war, their door was open all the way through to the courts. Okay, let's see.
Services the amenity, and it really has been consistent in that while the age of the demographics of the building have changed, gone back still always been one where basically the same interests have always have been continued through. And over all the years, that's really what the ownership originally.
Do you know how I got the first black family moving into a section of Shaker Heights that had been totally white? I went to my board and I said, I've got to have help because I'm sending this family to get a mortgage at a bank that we know will not give mortgages to black people going into a white area. And they're going to be very threatened because this is a fairly upper middle class area and they won't want to deal with this. And I said, would any of you help me and call the president of a bank if you have a large deposit and say that if the family is coming in that Stuart Wallace is bringing in for a mortgage, if they are qualified and you turn them down, it turned out we got a very wealthy man at bank. This is a godsend.
Dorothy Fulltime, who was the first woman broadcaster, lived in the building for many years. Carol Stokes, who was the first black mayor of a major city, and then went on to be a broadcaster in New York, and then came back to Cleveland and became a judge. He was a very interesting person and a person very close to us, and I had a wonderful relationship with Carol. And there was Zelma George, who was internationally renowned. There are just a lot of people throughout the years who had a huge impact. People like Arthur Leleveld, who marched with Martin Luther King in the early 60s, and actually was very badly injured on one of his marches in Birmingham, Alabama. There are three-quarter height doors in the laundry rooms that nobody really pays attention to. If you open those doors up, they wind their way around on the front of the building, underneath the building as well as out into the yard itself too. So they're unusual shaped tunnels, and it's like a child going through a maze. It was a lot of fun doing that, and it's really interesting because we have to use them still on a regular basis to go in there to check for valves or to make sure we don't have leaks, and it is something that's integral for the building. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this building is a building of community, and always has been. From the time it first started, it was intended to be, and it always has been, in that it has attracted people who've moved into the building, who've then attracted their friends or family members to move in. You have a number of people who are related, living in different units in the building, and always have.
She had her red hair done at the beauty parlor.
By the time it was a rental, by the time it was converted to a condominium.
Walk around the square. When the trolleys go by, I wave at them. Some of the guys know me. I walk my grandson. That's who you heard hollering on the phone. I was watching him. And they wave at us and toot the horns, I love this place.
It's too bad.
And the moment I stepped into the lobby of Shaker Towers, I knew, without having seen a unit, I knew this was the place I wanted to live.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about my getting older at 91, Shaker Towers, because of their fully attended garage and their lovely porters, almost offer what I would call assisted living.
To the treatment, we went to France on a barge tour. We came back. I went to work. One day I came home, and she said, I walked around Shaker Lake, the lower lake. It's like a miracle. So that, in addition to the other things we liked, meant that we had the lake in a way that we hadn't expected to have. That's another real plus for us, for this neighborhood. I mean, the lake down there, the lower lake is just great.
Mr. Kane was on the board. He was one of the original, or maybe not the original, but in the early boards of the Condominium Association. And there was always, and later on his wife Lillian Kane was on the board. There were a number of people who were very influential in Cleveland society who lived in this building, very well-known people. Zelma George, because she was so well-known internationally. And she actually spent a lot of time writing books here in the building and out on the deck. Once the garage roof was converted to a garden, she sat out there quite a bit and did a lot of writing out there. Well, my family has been involved with Shaker Towers since the mid-1960s and managed the building as a rental building. It was later sold by my father and my uncle, Carl Glickman, to Al Weisberg. But now we see more and more children. It's not just the grandchildren visiting. Because I remember bringing my daughter when she was very young to visit my grandfather, and she would go out on the garden deck and play and just run back and forth. And it's become a more attractive place.
And I knew I did not want to be in a huge new place or one of the really expensive brand new places that are going up. So I met Joanne Kaufman at a party. We started talking, and I told her that I was looking in the Shaker Square area, and I was very frustrated because my realtor kept trying to send me out into the hinterlands. And she said, I said, I really would like to live somewhere near Shaker Square. I told her I'd been looking, and she said, well, you don't want to live there. You want to live in Shaker Towers.
The first thing I noticed when we got here was the train stops in front of the door. And I said, you know, we got to find me a unit in this building.
The range of possibility for people of all ages to live in this building really has been here since day one. A good friend who later bought a house, their child was born here, and they raised that child here until they bought a house. Then at the other end of the spectrum, of course, we have people who are older because of the fact that many of us did come here as empty nesters. And that's a natural for apartment and condominium living, I think. But it has been very accessible. For me, the back stair railings are just the right width to walk down those stairs. So even though—
In an emergency, that is.
Well, even though, well, that could be something that people don't grasp. But that is one thing. Secondly, we built a ramp on the first level so that people in wheelchairs and walkers could meet that challenge. And so it is that people are more than willing. The other thing is that because we have only 4 people on a floor, you don't have these long hallways that you have in so many other buildings. That was one of my criteria, actually.
A wonderful place for younger people too. We had a very large condominium at Walden, and it's nice to have something that's a little more manageable and to have a very nice community. We've loved it here.
When we moved into this apartment has a back, I don't know if you call it a bonus room if you were a real estate agent, that had a full-size washer and dryer in it that had been grandfathered in. basically took up practically the whole room. And I had them taken out and started using laundry in the basement. And actually that's been really fun, because then you meet all the people who, wash their clothes down here. It's a great place for gossip if you ever want to hear what's going on.
Shaker Towers at that time was accessible, absolutely no steps from the garage to the condo, to the apartment. But there were other steps, and then later on, we even ironed those out. So now we have no steps except for the garden, which I can still negotiate. Because, it has great views on three sides. You see downtown Cleveland, you see Cleveland Heights, and what I'm not sure of, I think it's Seven Hills that I can see out on the south side. So it's really beautiful, especially for the sunsets. In this building in the beginning, when it was built and shortly after that, people moved from big houses in Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights here. That's one of the reasons that this layout is so good. Go upstairs, at least you can go down the hall, so you think you're going somewhere.
The things that I liked about this was the fact that I could garden. That was important to us.
She just turned 90 yesterday.
When you're living on the 11th floor and you have a garden on the second floor, you have to figure out how you're going to do it.
I'm sorry, I got the wrong person.
You want the garden in the house. One of the things
This is you.
If you're growing flowers, you grow them so you can see them in the yard, but you also want them in the house, and so we have to bring them up. And I very quickly learned that I only want to plant and nurture flowers that can be brought up.
This is who turned 90, I'm sorry. Anyone remember Bibi? She had a dress shop. Martha Towns lives in her place now. Yeah. Well, it gives you some idea of the feel of the building. And it's always been that way. It is that way today. And some of the things that make it what it is are the community feel. It is the community feel about it. We had a party on St. Patrick's Day. We had a champagne party when we finished the garage in the area where they clean the cars. We have a mandatory washing of the cars when there's snow so that the garage floor is preserved. Our preservation has been enormously interesting, from the roof to the garage floors to the elevators to whatever. And so the preservation items don't differ. I think they are doing 2 elevators here every year, and they have 17, is that true? And so it's just the scale of things. So the Shaker Square buildings are really special. The Shaker Courts came later. They were under Van Swaringen in the beginning, had an entirely different architect, but that was 1939, which is a good 10 years after what we're talking about in this building. So I hope that this gives you some idea of these 3 buildings and what might be different about them and special about them. So I think that if you have questions, that'd be wonderful. Yeah?
I have a question for you. I've done a few I'm a designer did a few of the apartments here, and they used to talk about the basement and how they had a chauffeur area, like each chauffeur had their own locker and.
I can't answer that.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
There were rooms down there
For the chauffeurs.
for the chauffeurs.
Right.
The maids had a maid's room. You know, all these apartments had a maid's quarters of some sort, but the men didn't. But they had to be there, so they would have these individual, very small rooms to sleep in and get dressed in, a common shower, whatnot, so that, and they would be available. Obviously, you know, how long that lasted in terms of how people's living capacities and whatnot, you know, even Shaker Towers, as it was pointed out,